Chapter 12 of Ox Team Days on the Oregon Trail. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ox Team Days on the Oregon Trail by Ezra Meeker and Howard Drigg. Chapter 12, Cruising About on Puget Sound. Our second day's cruise about the Sound took us past historic grounds. We went by old Fort Nisqually, one of the earliest posts of the Hudson Bay Company on Puget Sound. Some houses had been built on the spot in 1829 or 1830, though the fort, 1/4 of a mile back from the water, was not constructed until 1833, just 20 years before our visit. As the tide and wind favored us, we did not stop. Soon we came in sight of a fleet of 7 vessels lying at anchor in a large bay, several miles in extent. The sight of those 7 vessels lying in the offing made a profound impression upon our minds. We had never before seen so many ships at one place. Curiously enough, among them was the good bark Mary Melville, with her gruff mate and big-hearted master, Captain Barston. Upon the eastern slope of the shores of this bay lay the 2 towns, Port Steilacoom and Steilacoom City, both established in 1851. A far larger trade centered here than at any other point on Puget Sound, and we decided on a halt to make ourselves acquainted with the surroundings. A mile and a half from the shore we found also Fort Steilacoom. It was simply the camp of a company of United States soldiers quartered in wooden shells of houses and log cabins. Intense rivalry ran between the 2 towns, Upper and Lower Steilacoom, at this time. As a result, things were booming. We were sorely tempted to accept the flattering offer of $4 a day for common labor in a timber camp, but concluded not to be swerved from the search for a new home site. During this visit we began seeing Indians in considerable numbers. They seemed to be a listless lot, with no thought for the future or even for the immediate present. The Indians in those days seemed to work or play by spurts and spells. Here and there we saw a family industriously pursuing some object, but as a class they seemed to me the laziest set of people on earth. That opinion was materially modified later as I became better acquainted with their habits. I have found just as industrious people, both men and women, among the Indians as among the whites. The workers, it may be said, are less numerous among the men. The women are all industrious. Should we camp here and spy out the land, or should we go forward and see what lay before us? After a sober second thought, we realized that we had nothing to trade but labor, and we had not come as far as this to be laborers for hire. We had come to find a place to make a farm, and a farm we were going to have. Again we set about searching for clams, and the more we searched, the less we liked the look of things. Finally, on the 4th day after a long, wearisome tramp, we cast off at high tide, and in a dead calm, to continue our cruise. Oliver soon dropped into a comfortable afternoon nap, leaving me in full command. As the sun shone warm and the tide was taking us rapidly in the direction we wanted to go, why shouldn't I doze a little too, even if we did miss some of the sightseeing? I was aroused from my nap by Oliver's exclaiming, "What is that?" Then half to himself, "As I live, it's a deer swimming out here in the bay." "It surely can't be," I responded, 3/4 asleep. "That's what it is," he asserted. We were wide awake now and gave chase. Very soon we caught up with the animal and succeeded in throwing a rope over its horns. By this time we had drifted into the Narrows, and we soon found we had something more important to do than to tow a deer. We were among the riptides of the Sound. Turning the deer loose, we pulled our best for the shore and found shelter in an eddy. A perpendicular bluff rose from the high-water mark, leaving no place for campfire or bed. The tide seemed to roll in waves and with contending forces of currents and counter-currents, yet all moving in a general direction. It was our first introduction to a genuine tide rip. The waters boiled as if in a veritable cauldron, swelling up here and there in centers and whirling with dizzy velocity. A flat-bottomed boat like our little skiff, we thought, would not stay afloat there very long. Just then some Indian canoes came along, moving with the tide. We expected to see them swamped as they encountered the troubled waters, but to our astonishment they passed right through without taking a drop of water. Then there came two well-manned canoes creeping along shore against the tide. I have said well manned, but half the paddles, in fact, were wielded by women, and the post of honor, or that where most dexterity was required, was occupied by a woman. "Me si kakwas kopa sikum chuk," said the maiden in the bow of the first canoe, as it drew alongside our boat, in which we were sitting. Since our evening's experience at the clambake camp, we had been industriously studying the Chinook language, and we could understand that she was asking if we were afraid of the rough waters. We responded, partly in English and partly in Chinook, that we were, and besides that it was impossible for us to proceed against the strong current. "Nesika meet lite," she replied. That is to say, she told us that the Indians were going to camp with us and wait for the turn of the tide, and accordingly they landed nearby. By the time the tide had turned, night had come. We hardly knew whether to camp in our boat or to start out on unknown waters in the dark. Our Indian visitors made preparations to proceed on their journey, and assured us it was all right ahead. They offered to show us to good camping grounds in a big bay where the current was not strong. Sure enough, a short pull with a favorable current brought us to the Narrows and into Commencement Bay, in sight of numerous campfires in the distance. I remember that camp quite vividly, though I cannot locate it exactly. I know that it was on the waterfront within the present limits of the large and thriving city of Tacoma. I well remember our supper of fresh salmon, all of the delicious fish known. Give me the salmon caught by trolling in early summer in the deep waters of Puget Sound, the fish so fat that the excess of oil must be turned out of the pan while cooking. We had scarcely got our campfire started before salmon was offered us. I cannot recall what we paid, but I know that it was not a high price, else we could not have purchased. The following day we could see Mount Rainier, with its reflection in the placid waters of the bay. Theodore Withrop, the observant traveler who came into these same waters a few months later and wrote of it as Mount Tacoma, described it as a giant mountain dome of snow, seeming to fill the aerial spaces as the image displays the blue depths of tranquil water. A wondrous sight it was, and is, whatever the name. Next day we entered the mouth of the Puget River. We had not proceeded far up this stream before we were interrupted by a solid drift of monster trees and logs, extending from bank to bank up the river for a quarter of a mile or more. The Indians told us that there were two other like obstructions a few miles further up the river, and that the current was very strong. We secured the services of an Indian and his canoe to help us up the river, and left our boat at the Indians' camp near the mouth. It took a tugging of 2 days to go 6 miles. We had to unload our outfit 3 times to pack it over cut-off trails and drag our canoe around the drifts. It was a story of constant toil with consequent discouragement, not ending until we camped on the bank of the river within the present limits of the thriving little city of Puget. The Puget Valley at the time was a solitude. No white settlers were found, though it was known that 2 men had staked claim had made some slight improvements. An Indian trail led up the river from Commencement Bay, and another led westward to the Nisqually Plains. Over these pack animals could pass, but wagon roads there were none, and whether a feasible route for one could be found, only time and labor could determine. We retraced our steps, and in the evening landed again in the mouth of the river after a severe day's toil. We were in no cheerful mood. Oliver did not sing as usual while preparing for camp. Neither did I have much to say, but I fell to work mechanically preparing the much-needed meal. We ate in silence and then went to sleep. We had crossed the 2 great states of Illinois and Iowa, over hundreds of miles of unoccupied prairie land, as rich as anything that ever lay out of doors, on our way from Indiana to Oregon in search of land on which to make a home. Here, at what we might call the end of our rope, we had found the land, but with conditions that seemed almost too adverse to overcome. It was a discouraging outlook, even if there had been roads. Such timber! It seemed an appalling undertaking to clear this land. the greater part of it being covered with a heavy growth of balm and adler trees, and a thick tangle of underbrush besides. When we fell asleep that night it was without visions of new-found wealth. And yet later I did tackle a quarter section of that heaviest timberland, and never let up until the last tree, log, stump, and root had disappeared, though of course not all cleared off with my own hands. If we could have known what was coming 4 months later, we would have remained, in spite of our discouragement, and searched the valley diligently for the choicest locations. For in October following there came the first immigrants over the Natchez Pass Trail into Washington. They located in a body over nearly the whole valley, and before the year was ended had made a rough wagon road out of the prairies and to the Steilacoom, the county seat. We lingered at the mouth of the river, in doubt as to what best to do. My thoughts went back to wife and baby in the lonely cabin on the Columbia River, and again to that bargain we had made before marriage, that we were going to be farmers. How could we be farmers if we did not have land? Under the Donation Act we could hold 320 acres, but we must live on it for 4 years. It behooved us to look out and secure our location before the act expired, which would occur the following year. With misgivings and doubts, on the 4th day Oliver and I loaded our outfit into our skiff and floated out on the receding tide, whither we did not know. As we drew off from the mouth of the Puyallup River, numerous parties of Indians were in sight. Some were trolling for salmon, with a lone Indian in the bow of each canoe. Others with poles were fishing for smelt. Still others with nets seemed waiting for fishermen's luck. Other parties were passing, those in each canoe singing a plaintive chant in minor key, accompanied by heavy strokes of the paddle handles against the sides of the canoe, as if to keep time. There were some fine voices to be heard, and though there were but slight variations in the sounds or words, the Indians seemed never to tire in repeating, and I must confess we never tired of listening. During the afternoon we had traveled some 20 miles. We saw ahead of us larger waters into which we entered, finding ourselves in a bay 5 or 6 miles wide, with no very certain prospect of a camping place. Just then we espied a cluster of cabins and houses on a point to the east. There we made a landing, at what is now known as Algae Point, though it then bore the pretentious name of New York. We soon pushed on to the east shore, where the steam from a sawmill served as a guide, and landed at a point that cannot be far from the western limit of the present Pioneer Place, in Seattle, near where the totem pole now stands. As we were not looking for a mill site or town site, we pushed on next day, and gone about a few miles when a favorable breeze sprang up, bringing with it visions of a happy time sailing. But behind us lay a long stretch of open water several miles wide, and ahead we could see no visible shelter and no lessening of width. Consequently the breeze was not entirely welcome. In a short time the breeze stiffened, and we began to realize that we were in danger. We were afraid to attempt a landing on the surf-beaten shore, but finally, the wind increasing, the clouds lowering, and the rain coming down in torrents, we had to take the risk. Letting down the sail, we headed our frail craft towards the shore. Fortune favored us, for we found a good sandy beach upon which to land, though we got a thorough drenching while so doing. Here we were compelled to remain 2 or 3 days in a dismal camp until the weather became more favorable. Then launching our boat, we pulled for the head of Whidbey's Island, a few miles to the northwest. Now I have a fish story to tell. I have always been shy about telling it, lest some smart fellow should up and say I was drawing on my imagination. I am not. When we had broken camp and were sailing along, we heard a dull sound, like that often heard from the tide rips. As we rested on our oars, we could see that there was a disturbance in the water, and that it was moving towards us. It extended as far as we could see in the direction we were going. The sound increased and became like a roar of a heavy fall of rain or hail on water, and we became aware that it was a vast school of fish moving south, while millions were seemingly dancing on the surface of the water or leaping in the air. We could feel the fish striking against the boat in such vast numbers that they fairly moved it. The leap in the air was so high that we tried tipping the boat to try to catch some as they fell back, and sure enough, here and there one would drop into the boat. We soon discovered some Indians following the school. They quickly loaded their canoes by using the barbed poles and throwing the impaled fish into their canoes. With an improvised net, we too soon obtained all we wanted. When we began to go on, we were embarrassed by the mass of fish moving in the water. As far as we could see, there was no end to the school ahead of us. But we finally got clear of the moving mass and reached the island shore in safety, only to become weather-bound in the wilds once more. This camp did not prove so dreary as the last one, although it was more exposed to the swell of the big waters and the sweep of the wind. To the north we had a view of 30 miles or more, to where horizon and water blended, leaving it doubtful whether the land was in sight or not. As we afterwards ascertained, we could see the famous San Juan Island, later the bone of contention between our government and Great Britain, when the northern boundary of the United States was settled. Port Townsend lay some 10 miles from our camp, but was shut out from view by the intervening headland. We did not know the exact location of the town. Like the lost hunters, we knew where we were, but we didn't know where any place else was. Not lost ourselves, the world was lost from us. 3 ships passed us while we were at this camp, one coming out of the space, as it seemed, a mere speck, and growing to a full-fledged deep-sea vessel, with all sails set, scudding before the wind. The other 2 were gracefully beating their way out against the stiff breeze to the open waters beyond. What prettier sight is there than a full-rigged vessel, with all sails spread? The enthusiasm that rose as we gazed at the ships, coupled with the spirit of adventure, prompted us to go further. It was a calm, beautiful day when we reached Port Townsend. Distance leads enchantment, the old adage says, but in this case, the nearer we approached to the place, the greater our admiration. The shining, pebbly beach in front, the clear, level spot adjoining, with the beautiful, open, and comparatively level plateau in the background, and 2 or 3 vessels at anchor in the foreground, made a picture of a perfect city site. Upon closer examination of the little town, we found that the first impression gained from a distance was illusory. Many shacks and camps, at first mistaken for the white man's houses, were found to be occupied by natives. They were a drunken, rascally rabble, spending their gains from the sale of fish and oil in a debauch that would last as long as their money held out. This seemed to be a more stalwart race of Indians than those to the south, doubtless from the buffeting received in the larger waters. They would often go out even to the open sea on their fishing excursions in canoes manned by 30 men or more. After spending 2 or 3 days exploring the country, we turned back to the bay where lay the 7 ships we had seen near Steilacoom. We remembered the timber camps, the bustle and stir of the little new village, and the activity that we saw there, greater than anywhere else on the waters of the Sound. Most of all, my thoughts would go on to the little cabin on the Columbia River. 3 days sufficed to land us back in the bay we sought, but the ships were gone. Not a sailing craft of any kind was in sight of the little town, though the building activity was going on as before. The memory of those ships, however, remained with us and determined our minds on the important question where the trade center was to be. We decided, therefore, that our new home would be near Steilacoom, and we finally staked our claim on an island not far from that place. Once the claim had been decided on, my next desire naturally was to get home to my family. The expedition had taken 30 days, and of course there had been no news from my wife, nor had I been able to send back any word to her. End of chapter 12. Recording by Lyle Wilson, Haymarket, Virginia, October 2009.